Hello, I'd like to introduce Julia Diorio, a feminist university student at New York University in her final year doing a double major in journalism and social cultural analysis. She contacted me recently as she's currently doing research on anti-feminist media and wanted to interview me for material for her final thesis. I said I'd only do it if we could record the discussion so that I might put it on our YouTube channel. So Julia, a very warm welcome, and it's over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you for agreeing to speak today. I think it'll be really interesting. You're not the first men's rights activist that I've interviewed, so I'm really interested in seeing how you so when did you begin to start to get interested in topics and politics in particular with the anti-feminism?
Gosh, I think in about it goes back now. I think about 2009, I'd done a couple of years working for the Conservative Party in the UK as a business consultant, doing some work which was over the next 5 years to deliver £11.5 million to their bottom line. And in 2005, they'd had a new leader, a ghastly man by the name of David Cameron, who was deeply progressive. I don't think he was ever known to challenge anything that feminists wanted. And in 2009 or 10, he announced that he wished to introduce all women shortlists for prospective MPs, which was a deeply anti-meritocratic and unconservative move. And there was such a stink about it that he eventually he withdrew the plan, but the party found various ways to increase the number of female candidates and therefore MPs. But it woke me up for the first time, I think, to the what I regard and have regarded since then as a completely evil ideology of feminism. It's basically so that really first of all woke me up. And in 2013, I launched Justice for Men and Boys as a political party, the only political party in the English-speaking world campaigning for the human rights of men and boys, and carried on as a party for 10 years. We were for a time led by a lovely young woman by the name of Elizabeth Hobson, to whom there's a link on our website. But in April last year, we came to the conclusion that we weren't getting the traction that we needed as a political party. So we closed it as a party, but carry on campaigning all the same against feminism and campaigning for the human rights of men and boys. If you look, I mean, I know I sent you a link, Julia, but if you look at our last manifesto, it explores 20 areas where the human rights of men and boys are assaulted by the state's actions and inactions, almost always to privilege women and girls. There is not one area, and has not been for, I think, probably 40 or 50 years in the UK at least, where the human rights of women and girls specifically are assaulted by the state. It's an appalling thing.
So I know you said you started your career in the Conservative Party. Would you currently describe your political stance as such still?
I didn't start my political career there. I mean, I was there as a business consultant. But yes, my leanings are right of centre. I'm hoping for Donald to triumph today.
Big day.
I know it'll take a few days for it all to come out, but I very much hope that he ends up being your next president. The Conservative Party, I mentioned that David Cameron was a progressive, and all these subsequent, there's been 4 or 5 subsequent Conservative Party leaders, all of them have been progressives. And it's one of the reasons well, I mean, I think they're an embarrassment, quite frankly. And they lost the last general election very severely, in large part because they had talked about reducing mass immigration and had basically put immigration on steroids. I mean, they're an absolute shower, and I'd be happy for them to go into the dustbin of history, quite frankly, because there's a very interesting party called Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, who's over supporting Donald as we speak. And I'm very much hoping that Nigel Farage will become our next Prime Minister in 5 years' time.
Right. So conservative in the loosest sort of sense of the word.
Small C conservative, I guess.
Yeah.
But small C conservatives have had, I mean, the Conservative Party wasn't small C conservative, it was a progressive party. I mean, all the major parties are progressive.
Right. Yes, I understand. So you sent me a few links that I've been looking through. I've not made it quite through the entire manifesto, but I've been reading it, which has been helpful. Thank you. So if you could like boil down your thoughts on how contemporary feminism has why you disagree with it, and just kind of how your political party was fighting or continues to fight sort of just the overall stance of contemporary feminism.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't mind, Julia, I won't restrict it to contemporary feminism. I think,
yeah.
I mean, if we go back to, I think a lot of MRAs would look to the Seneca Falls Convention in New York State in about 1850. I never remember the exact year, but it's about 1850, as the start of modern feminism, if we can call it that. And the idea that feminism ever was a positive ideology, which has gone bad, I think is complete nonsense. I think it's been an absolute crock of shit from the beginning, quite frankly. It was never about equality. It was always about extending female privilege, regardless of the cost, to men, women, and children. And I know I mentioned in a number of my emails Professor Janice Fiamengo, who's probably the most eloquent critic of feminism, I would say, and commentator on gender issues in the world, and has been for some years. Well, she has on Studio Brûlé on YouTube. She has two series. The second series is basically the history of feminism from the outset, and she really shows. I don't know if she goes back further than the Seneca Falls Convention, but certainly even then, the prime movers in feminism were some absolutely appalling human beings, absolutely disgusting women, and they set the tone for feminism, which has carried on ever since. It is. I mean, I often say it's, apart from everything else, it's the most lethal ideology ever adopted by so many people. The World Health Organization estimates that there are more than 70 million abortions every year. And we have feminism to credit for the greatest or the most numerous genocide in human history. No parallels. Communism and, I mean, as evil ideologies, communism and fascism don't come close.
Right. So going off of that, I assume you consider yourself pro-life. Would that be accurate?
Yes, I do. I'm not religious, Julia, because people always assume that you're pro-life, but there's plenty of atheists and agnostics who are pro-life.
Sure.
So, I mean, in part because, I mean, this thing that the fetus is a ball of cells. I mean, human life starts conception, and that's not, I mean, that might be a religious position, but it's also a scientific position because, people talk about viability, and and that before, let's say, I think around 24 weeks, an unborn child is not viable outside the womb. Well, a 1-year-old baby is not viable either, but we don't kill it. And I mean, 17 million a year with no end in sight. It's well, I go back to the word genocide. But yes, I'm definitely pro-life, and I see, because abortion is a human issue. It's both a men's issue and a women's issue. The idea that it's uniquely a women's issue is, I think, nothing short of obscene.
Right.
Or
So
this my body, my choice bullshit. A baby, a baby in the womb is not the woman's body. It's a separate body. Half of its DNA comes from the father, and yet women are not even obliged to inform the fathers of their unborn children that either that they're bearing their children, or that they're about to kill it or have it killed. It's obscene. It's absolutely obscene.
sure. Do you have any, would you agree or disagree with any exemptions for abortion rules? For example, I'm not sure about the UK, but in the US, there's discussion on exemptions in cases of rape or incest. What do you feel about that?
I don't see killing an unborn child a solution to either problem. But the reality is, if you say to women that you can have an abortion if you've been raped, well, what are women going to do? They're going to say they've been raped.
Sure.
So no,
Right.
I think even there.
Right. You have spoken a little bit. I want to kind of go off of that and continue into the rape category. You have spoken a little bit about your excuse me, the just false accusations. Am I
Right.
correct? And how that
Yes.
can impact? Can you tell me a little bit about your movement in that respect?
Right. False allegations of sexual assault and rape. I guess are you thinking of that particularly, Julia?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Well, it's long been known that false accusations are women making false accusations. It's a very common thing. William Collins, in his amazing book, The Empathy Gap: Male Disadvantages and the Mechanisms of Their Neglect, puts a figure on the percentage of women lying to the police, and he uses only 2 or 3 official statistics to arrive at this number. And he comes in and he estimated 77%. I actually think that that the percentage is higher. I think he was making 1 or 2 assumptions, but I think it's higher.
Can you explain a little bit why you would think that the percentage is higher? Do you have, like in your experience, you have come to that conclusion, you would say?
Do you mean, have I been accused of sexual assault?
No, no, sorry, excuse
Okay,
me.
no,
That's not
no,
what I
no.
meant at all. Just,
I mean, if we take, I mean, William Collins is probably the leading data-driven researcher and so on, and commentator on feminism and gender issues, I'd say, in the world, and he's written a number of other books too. But as is often the case, he made 1 or 2 judgment calls in coming to the figure of 77%.
okay.
And I'm inclined to make different judgment calls, which would make the figure higher. I can't remember the details offhand, Julia, I'm afraid.
No, of course not. So you would consider yourself an anti-feminist, correct?
Absolutely. Very, very, very proud one.
So are you familiar with the incel movement?
Not terribly, to be honest with you. I have some sympathies for incels. I think it's not unreasonable that a young man unable to find a partner will look at his father and his grandfather and think to himself, how is it that they found partners and yet I'm struggling badly? Most of my friends are struggling badly. But I mean, this, it's all an inevitable result of women's hypergamy. Women, a very large majority of women would prefer a partner of high earnings and other attributes. And as women have flooded into the realms of employment, they're taking many of the jobs where a generation or two back they would have been women seeking men doing those jobs.
Sure.
And a lot of those women are in those positions and at a level of seniority which is not based on merit. I mean, it's even true. I have a campaign called Campaign for Merit in Business, which is I think the world's only opposition to the decades-old initiative to increase the proportion of women on corporate boards. And I presented in 2012 evidence to House of Commons and House of Lords inquiries, the evidence of a causal link between increasing gender diversity on boards and corporate financial decline. And there was very substantial, I mean, this was 12 years ago. There's already very substantial evidence along those lines. There has not been, to the best of my knowledge, Julia, a single piece in the global mainstream media revealing that causal link. So I had to chuckle to myself when you used the expression anti-feminist media, because at least if we talk about mainstream media, there is no anti-feminist mainstream. I cannot think off the top of my head a single journalist on a major on a major publication that is known for being a strong challenger of feminism or feminists.
That makes sense. Going further to your point on women in the workforce, could you sort of define your opinions, your stance on the wage gap, which is, I feel, a main point of the feminist movement, if you would disagree with or not?
Oh my God, are feminists still going on about the bloody wage gap? It doesn't seem to matter how many decades that's debunked. This crap, I mean, Warren Farrell wrote a book called something like How Women Can Earn More. The wage gap, I mean, it's actually very small now. And the wage gap is the result of freely made choices made by men and women. If women could yeah. I'm really surprised you brought that up, because I mean, in my kind of circles, that's been debunked possibly before you were born, Julia. I hate to say that, but it's a joke. It's a real joke. I mean, you take what women choose to do. Women choose, let's say, even at university, to go into lines of work that are not destined to lead to high-paying jobs. For all that feminists want to increase the proportion of female engineers and so on, women don't want to do those things. And we only need to look at Scandinavia, at what's amusingly called the Scandinavian paradox, which is no paradox to anybody who knows anything about men and women. But the paradox is that in Scandinavian countries, where women probably have the greatest freedom to choose how they live their lives in the world, they very much choose the traditional things that women choose. They're to do with people or animals. I mean, women are drawn to working with and for people and animals, and most men are perfectly happy to be working on inanimate objects, running businesses. Yeah, and there's also the issue of why are there so few female entrepreneurs? Perfectly bloody obvious. Women are risk averse. I mean, although women have got a great deal of money, they still want to leech off men in getting their businesses up and running and funding them. And it's something we see in sports, of course. I'm not aware of a major sport in the world where the women's sport isn't a leech on the men's sport. And very often, for example, in tennis, certainly in the UK at Wimbledon, women have for, I think, 15 or 20 years had the same prize money as the men, despite playing for 3 sets instead of 5. I mean, the women's tennis is so undemanding that the top players like the Williams sisters would routinely play in both the singles and doubles and get to the finals, and therefore earn more from the competition than any man possibly could. But that's not money that's come into the game from from interest in women's sport. It's as always, women demand equality of income without willing to put in the work or taking risks.
So to go back a little bit, you mentioned you're supporting Donald Trump obviously from afar, but what are your opinions on obviously we don't know the outcome yet, but just sort of either outcome, whether Kamala Harris winning the election and becoming the first female president versus Donald Trump winning the election, and I mean taking back office.
Okay, well, I mean, obviously, I'm hopeful that if Trump becomes president, that there are fewer deaths or fewer killings of unborn children in the US. But I mean, Kamala Harris, I mean, she has a very checkered history, as I'm sure you must know. She basically got a start in politics by sleeping, by having a relationship with, I can't remember the judge's name now, in California, and was given positions that were so far beyond where her experience could have taken her, but utterly shameless, and she'll inevitably drive feminist agendas. One thing that's interested me a great deal in this election is the growing gender gap, and I don't think it's uniquely an American phenomenon, but in recent years, women as a class have tended to become more liberal, as you'd say, more left-wing, as we'd say, and men more conservative. And it seems that the two things are almost cancelling each other out. But it could be that if Donald Trump is elected, it could be the first example of a major election in the world where men's bias for the conservative and young men's conservative and increasingly black men's conservatism is deciding an election, which would be a wonderful thing, because I think a lot of MRAs don't agree with me on this, but I'm of the view that until men can make their views known on gender issues at the ballot box, nothing's going to change. Well, at the moment they basically have no choices, because all the major political parties, certainly in the UK, pander to women, or all of them. That they're all pandering to half the electorate. And one day they're going to realize that the half of the electorate that they're ignoring, they really can't ignore anymore. And that could happen with if Nigel Farage becomes our next Prime Minister, and hopefully does something about the decades-old scandal of fathers being denied access to their children in the family courts. It's an absolute scandal. It's a major driver of male suicide, hardly surprisingly. It's child abuse. But the family courts, people talk about the family courts being broken. They're not broken. They're designed to remove fathers from their families and children at the behest of malicious mothers. That's their job.
Why do you think obviously you can't speak for other people in your community, but you mentioned that you're kind of a standout on that particular stance. Why do you think that is?
Oh, sorry.
Speaking on the ballot box.
About the ballot box. Okay. That's a very good question. I think that men, including MRAs, for decade after decade, have believed in our sort of masculine way that if we just point to the obscene assaults on men's human rights and the obscene privileging of women and girls, that somehow things are going to change. That there'll be enough empathy, but the whole point of the Empathy Gap book is to explain why the gap exists. It's hardwired. So men sort of the problem is that the power is held by feminists and by men who will not say no to them. So the fact that men are suffering, the fact that the male suicide rate in the UK and US is, I think, between three and 4 or 5 times the female rate, and government does nothing, literally nothing about that. I think that tells you everything that you need to know about the empathy gap. If in the US or elsewhere, women were committing suicide at 3 or 4 times the rate men were, I cannot imagine how many billions of dollars would be invested in sorting that out, in bringing down the female suicide rate. But no, I can't recall a government in the Western world being prepared to accept that male suicide is a problem. It's actually in the UK, it's the #1 cause of death of men under 45. #1 cause of death under 45. And the government doesn't give a damn. 3/4 of the income taxes which fund government come from men. And we have an expression, men get the shitty end of the stick on everything. And the idea that women are oppressed, in fact, I'd say the idea that they were ever oppressed is a crock of shit. That the idea that they are today is beyond a joke. I don't normally say the word shit in interviews, but there we go.
That's okay. I don't mind. So going back a little bit, you mentioned sort of women choosing to go into the line of just caring for other humans and animals. Is that something that you would say, like, if in an ideal world, if you could sort of choose who goes where within the employment scheme, you would choose women in sort of in like veterinary and sort of.
No, it's not for me to tell women what lines of work to go in. All I'm saying is that women incline to that because those fields of work have an emotional reward. And
I see.
If you accept what to me is startlingly bloody obvious that women are more emotional than men, then it follows that they will tend to tend to want lines of work which have an emotional reward. They also prefer lines of work where they have colleagues. They're not. There's not too many women long distance lorry drivers, are there? Women like company, whereas men are perfectly happy to be or prepared even to do jobs that where there's not much company. I mean, women also avoid, like the plague, jobs. Well, they avoid jobs which are outdoors because they can be uncomfortable at times with the weather. They avoid risky jobs. 95% or more of workplace deaths are of men. They avoid very dirty, disgusting work. There's not many women down the sewers. But without men sort of building and maintaining all these infrastructures, all this infrastructure, women would be at a loss. Paul Elam, who was a great men's rights activist, he said a lovely thing in his speech. He said, "I swear that women, when they go to the toilet, think that the poop fairy comes and flies away with what they've just done." I love that line.
So if you could sort of just say the biggest difference between men's rights activists and anti-feminists, would you say there is a difference, or is
Yeah, I
there
mean, not all MRAs would call themselves feminists, anti-feminists. There are even some who call themselves feminists, and they are the lowest form of human being imaginable, as far as I'm concerned. They actually believe that by pleading that they're feminists and pleading to feminists to share power, that they'll be effective. Well, they've been trying decade after decade with zero success. And we also talk about men's rights activists, but it's only a pretty small proportion of people who call themselves MRAs who are activists, in a real sense. I'm often asked why there are so few young MRAs, and including at universities. And one of the reasons is that some young men have had their careers blighted. I mean, the first thing that a corporate human remains department will do is Google somebody's name, and God help them if they've been actively anti-feminists or MRAs. They probably won't even get an interview.
Right. Sure. So can you tell me a little bit about like your sort of what struck you to take your beliefs and move towards actually creating an actual political party? Was that difficult, or was it something that was sort of a natural decision for you?
Oh no, it was super easy. There's probably no country in the world where it's easier to set up a political party than the
Sure,
UK.
it's probably easier in the UK than it is in America, but
Oh, America is monstrously difficult. I remember somebody telling me the details of it, and they just made my head spin. But no, you can. I think with a dream and a few £100, you're in business. But I think it was that back in 2013, even then I believed that the only route was a political route. I mean, I haven't been able to give it great traction, but somebody will one day. And I hope and believe that Nigel Farage will be part of that, because I'm hopeful that he will take up the cause of fathers being denied access to their children. And one of the reasons, by the way, that's politically interesting is that denying children access to their fathers, and it is fathers in 95% of cases, not mothers. One of the reasons that's politically important is that denying children access to their fathers, it's not only child abuse and father abuse, it's abuse of the child's uncles, aunts, grandparents, great-grandparents. That's a lot of voters. And, I think, and there are so many, there are probably millions of fathers who haven't seen their children because of through being denied access. And I'll bet quite a lot of those would vote for a party that would commit to ending this obscene situation of denying children access to fathers.
Have you faced any extreme backlash during your time as the sort of co-founder, co-leader of the party, would you say?
No, no, I'd support, but we actually had, I mean, you probably know that the BBC is, well, to my eyes and eyes of people like me, the most damnably woke left-wing organization imaginable. And I was actually on BBC television and radio fairly frequently in the few years following launch, but I haven't heard from them for 5 years, I don't think. They just have totally battened down on not giving platforms to anybody critical of feminism or feminists. It's actually one of the 20 areas we have that we have on our posters for the annual international conferences on men's issues, denial of access to platforms. And it's not just media platforms, Julia, it's also physical platforms. Anybody who's tried to find a venue prepared to host an international conference on men's issues will realize it's an uphill battle, very, very difficult.
So you've had issues sort of publicly in like physically congregating and sharing your ideas?
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, I must have approached more than 100 potential venues in London for the 2016 conference, which is the first conference that I hosted. They all turned us down, and we eventually went to a wonderful venue, but called the Excel Centre. And the only reason that they were prepared was they said, look, we host arms fairs. We have events with 10,000 protesters, some of them concreting themselves in the building. And, he said, look, you're not going to you might get a few angry feminists, but you're not going to get anything on that scale. So that was good. I tried in 2016 a few places, including Amnesty International, who had a venue that would have been absolutely perfect. And they told us that we couldn't hire the venue because they were a feminist organization and we were an anti-feminist party. So Amnesty International, they're admitting that they implicitly care more about women's human rights than men's human rights. And I think they lost a few members over that, but I'm sure that, if I can ask you a question, Julia, how do you explain that there are no mainstream media platforms for anti-feminists in the world?
I've found that throughout my research so far, I mean, I've only been doing this for a few months. I would agree that there's no major platforms, but I have found a lot of people like yourself who are creating social media channels, creating websites, and sharing their views and engaging in online discourse and things like that. And that's been sort of my main source of information. But
right.
I haven't.
But Julia, sorry, I've got to go back to my question. Why are there no platforms for I mean, feminism is not women, it's an ideology. So why is there not a single mainstream media publication in the world that is prepared to employ somebody to challenge this ideology? I'm seriously interested in what your take on that is.
On why?
On why? Given, I mean, to go back to my point,
I'm not sure. I mean, that's half of my thesis, to be honest. It's sort of just kind of exploring the different lenses of media and exploring the different points of views that are represented, underrepresented, overrepresented. That's half of the
Right,
question in
but
what I'm.
right, but have you not come to any conclusions about why there are no anti-feminist voices in the mainstream media?
I'm not even nearly halfway done with my research yet. No.
Okay, all right.
If you're comfortable speaking, I know you mentioned you have two daughters. Are you comfortable with maybe
Yes.
speaking about how you're um how is your how would you say
No,
that has changed?
sorry, Julia. No, I have two daughters I love very, very dearly, and and the only reason people tend to know that is because it's on my Wikipedia page, um, which was started, by the way, by a woman by the charming name of the Vintage Feminist. Um, and Wikipedia, feminists are all over Wikipedia like a cancer, like they're over most things. But no, their their lives are private. They support what I do, but no, that's as much as I'm prepared to say about them.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, do you have anything? I know you mentioned a few names that I've written down. Do you have anything else you believe I should look into? Anything else you believe, anyone else you believe I should reach out, interview as well?
Right, okay. Um, I mean, I suppose I can give you a list of some of the most prominent men's rights advocates and anti-feminists. And I'm going to get some complaints about this because I'm inevitably going to miss some people. Um, the I mean, first of all, a couple of women who do get a little bit of media exposure. Um, Professor Janice Fiamengo, who I've already mentioned, is a very good friend and just a remarkable commentator on gender issues, doing both her Fiamengo File video series, but also her Substack articles. And the quality, the articles are amazing, and the level of sophistication of the discussion that that you can read online is second to none, absolutely second to none. She occasionally has pieces published in the Australian edition of The Spectator. The UK edition is absolutely appalling. It commissions feminists to write for it and refused my offer of £7,000 for an advert revealing the truth about domestic violence, that it's not a gendered issue. But also in Spectator Australia is a most remarkable Australian lady, one of the best, if not the best, campaigner on men's issues in the world, Bettina Arndt.
Thank you.
So in terms,
I mean, obviously, a list right now is you don't have to have a list right now. I mean, just
okay,
feel free to feel free to email me if you come up with any names.
okay. I
After
mean,
our
yeah. I mean, Paul E. Lamb and William Collins come to mind. I'm not sure that they'd give you their time. Nor Janice nor Bettina, but I hope they will.
It's fine. I'm used to people saying no. It's not a big deal. I appreciate your time.
Okay.
You think feel free to email me if you have any other things you feel I should look into, if you have any other questions. But yeah, I appreciate your time and your perspective. It was very helpful.
Thanks, Julia, and thanks for agreeing that this be videoed and put on YouTube. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
And good luck with your degree. And if you ever
Thank
do
you.
come up, if you ever do find out why the mainstream media, the global mainstream media, doesn't employ so much as one anti-feminist, do let me know.
Sure. I will gladly send you a link when I've finished my work.
Awesome. Thanks, Julia. Take care now.
Have a great night.
And you. Bye.